Dirty Flight sponsors 10-Year Tip with Garry Dibley.
Good evening, it is a Monday night, it is 9 o'clock. It is time to 10-Year Tip with myself, Garry Dibley, and the ever-capable mod master, that is Mark. It's Monday again, can't believe it. I've got broadband back tonight. It arrived about 3 days after the show. And the wonders of 4G seemed to bail me out for a little while during that time, which was great. Absolutely knackered tonight. That's work, totally different thing. Lot of stuff going on. I don't know if you did see the little video pre-show. That is sort of like the selection of bits that we've got for the Children in E raffle that I'm running this year. I had a very nice package turn up today, which I had 3 of these puppies in. This is the Paps X. Three of those I've got all bagged up, ready to go. Very tempted to have a go, but I'm going to keep it virginal for somebody. Also, we've got one of these, this the Juggernaut as well. So lots of nice stuff. And I have been promised a sort of customed Siam hybrid thing mod as well. Lots of stuff coming. Yeah, it's been bonkers week. I believe that looking at our videos, me and Mark both had sort of a bad postage week this week, and we both had to look down other sort of avenues. And I sort of picked up on. I was getting a lot of questions. We were talking a little bit in the chat about last week about soldering, and quite a few people have actually sort of sent me messages saying, can you give us a walk through this, that and the other. So I'm looking at that in a bit more depth today, and Mark is sort of putting together a really novel. Well, I'd like this mod actually. It would serve me great purpose. So yeah, it's been sort of mad, and I've been trying to weatherproof all the workshops and that for the winter, which is no doubt coming soon. Depressing times, but Christmas is just around the corner. Not many more shopping days left apparently. There we go. Let's crack into our first little sort of section, and we'll see you back here in a very short while.
Well, this week the postman's let me down as usual, and nothing of the parts I've been waiting for has arrived. So all the projects I've got lined up will have to be put on hold for now. So instead, I thought, I'm going to mod a bottle opener. What the hell? What I'm going to mod it with is basically guts from an Ego type battery. What it is one of these, lovingly referred to as the butt plug batteries. So I'm going to take this one apart because I'm going to make it with 2 batteries in it, I think. So I'll pop a cloth over the end. And just gently wiggle it out. And there is your basic lineup. But I don't think I'm going to be able to get it out from here. It's rather tight. As you'll see, I've had to take off a lot of the plastic when I took it out through the hole. So what I'm going to do is cut this in half, which is probably not something I would recommend. I'll pop back with a Dremel and show you what I do. So here is the Dremel ready, and what I'm going to try and do is just cut through this plastic window between the 2 halves very carefully, because I need to avoid touching the battery. So fingers crossed. So, if I don't wreck the studio, that's most of the plastic cut all the way through. I should just be able to snap away the last bit. And as you'll see, the reason that you can't get the battery out with this particular one is the little LEDs are wrapped around the battery, so it won't go out the hole at the top. I'll be back in a sec, and I've got all this extra tape off and unwrapped. Now you do need to be a little bit careful when you remove the tape. Whatever you do, don't use a knife to cut the tape away, because there are contacts here, and if you short something out, it could get a little bit nasty. And these wires are incredibly delicate, so you'd have to be a little bit careful. But if you can manage it, and I'll just pop through. And now we have two naked egos. Handily, these are labelled black and red, so it makes it a lot easier to see what you're doing. This one, the positive had come away from the top, so I'm going to use this one as the one I'm going to solder to. Basically, I'm just going to be desoldering the wires from this solder tab, and as these have got solder tabs on them, it does make it a bit better for soldering to batteries. So I have the negative wire to this one first. And then the positive. Which appears to be easier said than done. Now I want these in parallel, not in a series, as I'm going to be using the charging from the Ego board. They need to be in parallel. And these need batteries here. These wires need to be a lot shorter, I think. Give me 1 second.
Right, we're back in the room for another week. Based on sort of one of the questions that I got sort of thrown or brought up in our live chat last week, I was rapidly getting quite a lot of questions on soldering, and following on from that, I've had a large number of PMs and requests and things like that. So I thought we'd have a little look today. Everybody says myself and Mark make it look relatively easy. There are a few sort of reasons for that hopefully try and show you through a little bit on where we go. One of the first questions that I had, based on, if you like, your iron tip. Now, this is a relatively inexpensive iron. Got it from CPC Electronics. It's a sort of a very heat solder station, and that aids greatly when you're using a solder, mainly a solder has an optimum melting point, but I'll come back to that bit in a tad. Let me just pop down. One of the questions that we had is what do you do when your tip gets a little bit knackered and a little bit worn and probably won't take solder as well as it did. Now, the trick that I've found with a sort of set of side snips, I just tend to just give it a very small rub up and down, sort of take any of the loose crap off, and you can see that starting to free some of that stuff up. I don't file it, but with a decent set of side snips, when it's hot, give it a little sort of little go up and down, and then I just clean it off in the sponge. I won't show you that because obviously that's going to be totally pointless. Now once I've given that a clean, you'll see that come back relatively nice and shiny, and that should take solder quite easily. Now one of the other reasons that's taking solder quite easily is because I have the iron to the temperature of my solder. Now this particular solder is got a, if you like, you shouldn't exceed 500 degrees C with this solder. The optimum melting point on it is around about 400 degrees C. So I keep my iron set at 400 degrees C, and that gives me the best flow from the solder onto the tip and obviously onto the piece of work. Tinning up your tip was another reason. You know, somebody asked, why do you tin up your tip? Now, you tin up your tip to aid the flow of solder. If I was to go on a piece of work with a dry, a dry tip and try and feed my solder in, the first thing I'm going to be doing effectively is tinning my tip anyway, because you're feeding that solder in. So you're always better off to tin the piece that you're working on, tin your tip. And realistically, if you've tinned your, if you can, I'll show you how we do it on a board a little bit later. But it just aids that flow. It's all about aiding the flow. You don't want to over boil the solder that you've got on the end of your tip either. If you leave that sitting there like that, smoking away very, very rapidly, as most of these have, if you like, a built-in flux, you end up burning off all your flux and this, that and the other. The one thing I will say about soldering is you do need to realistically use it in a well ventilated place. You shouldn't really sort of be sat over a piece of work for too long doing a vast quantity of soldering. So sort of taking that on a bit further, what I'm going to go through and show you is, if you like, I've got a chunk of wire here, and just show you why we would sort of, I'm just going to strip this back to start with using the sides. Normally when I'm working on wire, rather than just working with that straight as it is, I would normally put a couple of twists in there first, just so it's sort of nice and tight. When you're working in some of these small spaces, you don't want strands sticking out left, right and centre when you're trying to, when you're trying to solder on something. Now I use my little grip here, and what I would do is clean my tip, bring it in, tin it first on here, and then I'll just bring my wire into my solder, and that will feed in there much easier. So that's a fully tinned up piece of wire now. I'm going to pop away, I'll come back in two, and we'll show you how that sort of principle goes through onto what you're sort of trying to solder to. Back in two. And we're back in the room. Just picking up on a couple of comments there that I picked up in chat, and it really depends. There's no set, if you like, temperature for solder. The normally what you'll find when you look at a solder or when you're buying a solder, it will have, if you like, an optimum flow temperature, and that is the temperature that is, if you like, specified that solder will work best at. It's different amongst unleaded, leaded, you know, right the way through the range, depending on the flux contents, this, that and the other, how many cores, all of that sort of stuff. They also have an upper end of the scale, as I said earlier, which is, if you like, the boiling point. You don't really want to exceed that. All you're going to end up doing is cooking your solder. So it really depends on what solder you're using as to what the temperature needs to be. I understand that's difficult with obviously you know, just a straight plug in the wall soldering iron that is literally just going to heat up to a certain temperature, but you can match. You'll probably find what the optimum temperature of that iron is, and you can match that to the solder that you're using to get the, you know, the best of all worlds round. But relatively cheap. I mean, the little sort of solder station I've got there is sort of, it was about 20 quid. You can pick them up for about 12 quid. Temperature control, one through CPC, and they do just have, if you like, the green, amber through to red, but they will roughly give you a gauge of what the temperature is, and as long as you're somewhere in the middle, it should work well, should flow well. I'm going to follow, obviously, you know, following that through, and we'll see if you've got any questions towards the end, just shout up in chat, and we'll do our best to try and answer them. I'm going to pop into our first ad break, and we'll be back very shortly after this.
Liberty Flight sponsors 10-Year Tip with Garry Dibley. iViber and iViber Elixir, based in Yorkshire, for your e-cig needs. That's iViber.co.uk and iViber-elixir.co.uk. iViber and iViber-elixir.co.uk, proud sponsors of VaporTrails.tv. Liberty Flight sponsors 10-Year Tip with Garry Dibley.
And we're back in the room once again. I will say, when I was actually sort of doing that video over the weekend, and it was a very, very quick job, because my sister's been over from Tenerife, and she flew back today. She should well be home. She may well be watching. If she is, hello, hope you had a good flight. Yeah, I mean, it took me back to sort of my early college days when I was doing electronics. I did it was course then 224, which was sort of a electronic service course, because I was working for Granada as an apprentice TV engineer. And one of the first things they give us to sort of practice, if you like, soldering skills, the first time I encountered an iron, when I was sort of 16, many years ago, when I was 16, they give us a sort of a little a length of wire and an iron and a certain amount of solder, and we had to chop the wire down into certain bits and actually make a if you like, a cube. And then we were marked on the solder joints around the cube, and this absolute git, because if you overheated the wire that you're working on, you ended up melting the joint at the other end, and you ended up with a mess and start all again. So it's a good little sort of good little practice thing. I wouldn't want to do it again. It probably failed dramatically if I even tried that now. But yeah, there are lots of, if you're worried about your soldering, just practice on scraps of wire. Scrap of wire will cost you nothing. There we go. One thing I was talking to my sister, who was over, as I say, she was over for a couple of weeks, and she's saying to me that vaping is really kicking off over in Tenerife. she runs a number of dance troupes, and she employs a lot of dancers, and I should get over there more. But they are all now gradually switching over to e-cigs. Obviously, the dancers, and I think they're finding it much easier, if you like, to complete a night's work. I've got the police helicopter circling overhead, so I will pop into our next little set of videos, and I'll pop back very shortly after this. He says.
So the wires are now the right length. Basically, I'm going to want to just solder them together. Which would help if that actually turned up this one end, wouldn't it? Well, that's clever. It really helps if you don't desolder what you're working to, doesn't it? I should be back in a second when I've soldered this one. So I've got the two batteries soldered together now, and for safety I'm just going to add some insulation tape around the batteries and the connections to make sure everything's just insulated, basically. That's just a case. This would be a lot easier if I remembered my scissors. And basically that's all it'll take, just a single layer. Just to make absolutely certain that things don't get shorted. And of course it helps stop the wires getting pulled on as well. So that's our battery pack insulated up. As you'll see from the lights, everything's still working. So the next job is going to be working on the bottle opener. This was a novelty bottle opener which I think had multiple purposes, and one of them had a sound thing in here at some point, but this one was empty. So the hardest job is going to be finding a place to attach the connector. I think there's just enough room in there, but I'm not really going to know until I drill it. So this show could end up being short if it all goes wrong. But starting with the pilot drill, I'm just going to be drilling across the joint as central as I can make it. And of course that happens. So I'll grab my insulation tape again. And try again. I've sort of got a pilot hole.
Right, so I've got my little bit of wire that we tinned up earlier. I'm just going to trim that back to a usable length. Clipping away from the eyes as you do. Tinned up bit of wire. And let's bring in something that we would effectively, you know, solder to, and this one here is one of the little VV boards that you've probably seen Mark use a bit recently, just to show you how we would sort of make it so easy or look easy to get that to solder to the board. Everybody has their own way of doing it. I'm not saying this is the correct way, it's the way that I work. It may be completely different the way that Mark works or other people work, but soldering for many years I've found this is sort of like the he's trying to get a focus on there but it's not working. The most effective way of soldering to here. Again, what I would do is always clean my tip before I present it to any form of solder, and that's just with a moistened sponge in your little sort of solder holder. Tin up my tip as I would, and then I present that to the board and just feed the solder then into the tip, and you can see that's sort of tinned up that joint on there. Always cleaning the tip before you come back for another go, unless you're working relatively quickly. And when I mean quickly, again, I'm bringing in my tip, tinning on the board, and I'm feeding the solder into the board. There's a bit of grease or something on this. There is definitely grease on there, and that's when that will cause sometimes a bad joint, which is a good point to sort of remember. With these boards, they can have a bit of grease on them. So sometimes if you're finding that you've got a bit of grease on one of the terminals, I'll just give it a little rub down with a file or something like that, just to give me a good key to solder to. Clean my tip, tin my tip on the board, and you can see how quicker and easier that sort of joint took. Again, on straight. Now because I'm doing that quick enough, I know that my solder hasn't boiled on the end of the tip, so I was able to sort of solder. If you're soldering a few quickly, as long as you don't get a massive blob, a massive build up of solder. And the best way, what some people do is feed a huge quantity into there and end up with a blooming great blob hanging off the end of it, which is only going to do one thing, is that. And you don't want that landing on your leg or something like that. So keep it to a minimum on the tip. molten silver. It's hot stuff. I've sort of developed asbestos fingertips working with this stuff now. You have to excuse me today as well. Got a little tickle in the throat. So when we're obviously to this point, this is why it looks so easy sometimes. We've already got a good joint established on our board. We've got a good you know, a good bond with a good tinning on our wire here. I'm just cleaning my tip, bringing that in. I'm going to apply a minimum bit of sort of tin on my tip, and then what I do is I place the two on top of each other, and then I'll feed that down in until the two are actually sort of one, and you get a good joint. Now realistically, once that's sort of set off, you know, you inspect your joint, there's no cracks, there's no nothing, it's a decent solid joint on there, it's not going anywhere. Same can be said for when you're working with components, joining things to switches, etc, etc. You can pretty much do the same on the other side. Now you wouldn't really want to add a resistor to this, but if you're working with a component and you wanted to, you know, add something to it, I would always do the same thing. Tin my tip, I'll bring in this resistor here, and I'm just going to apply a little bit of solder to the end of that, just so I've tinned the end of that wire. Bring in my board, again cleaning my tip, tinning my tip, bringing the two together, touching them home, and I've got a decent joint. That ain't going anywhere. It's all about having the right heat, delivering the right heat, not delivering too much of a blob, making sure you've got a decent tin on the piece you're working on, the piece that you're trying to solder, and then it is just a case of bonding the two together with a little bit of tin on the tip. It is relatively simple. If you've got a decent clean tip, you're sponging it down every time you're going to apply a tin, you've tinned the wire that you're working on, and you've tinned the piece that you're trying to apply it to. It is then, like I say, just a case of pinning the two together. Some considerations need to be made when you're working on other bits. For example, when you're working on switches, the way that some of these switches are actually put together, you've got to be relatively quick with what you're working, you know, with, and you don't want to be applying lots and lots of heat to the switch. So when I'm particularly working with a switch, I'll bring my tip in. I don't know why we've gone all funny yellow there. I think it's glare back off the metal. I'll bring my tip in, tin up my tip, straight onto my switch, a small blob. Same on the other side, bang, a small blob. I will not hold that iron any more than is necessary on a joint on a switch. The reason for that, and you can see our tin that we've got on there, obviously these switches, they don't take to heat too well. If you're sitting there with a soldering iron on that terminal of a switch for sort of a good few seconds, the chances are, because this one here is embedded in plastic, you start heating up the terminal, and then when you find that you go to press the switch, you know, that terminal, you've melted effectively the stuff that's holding it in. I mean, I'll show you what I mean. Holding you know, getting some heat on there, trying to get a joint. I'm heating it up. I'm heating it up. I'm heating it up. And effectively, when I press that button now, that's popped that out. That switch is now pretty much useless. You can see how that's melted the terminal around there. You know, if you're holding, trying to solder, holding, trying to solder, you can see, look, dump. It doesn't take much to get that pin to start moving around and ended up with that. And yes, I have just buggered a perfectly good switch to show you what I mean. But with these, or any type of switch, take care. Because you may well not notice it when you're actually working on the mod. But if you are taking a bit longer than necessary to solder a certain type of switch, you are potentially doing heat damage to the internals. Which means that when you've got your switch in place, it may well work. You know, it may well work for you for a little bit, but very rapidly that switch is going to start to fail, and that is down to the point of when you actually soldered that in, and a bit too much heat. We'll continue this in a little bit. I'll pop back in another 2. Yes, and we are back in the room. I did actually commit switch murder live on air. Do apologise for that. But as I was saying, some things that you're soldering to, you can, if you apply too much heat, you know, you can damage what you're actually soldering to. Even some of the silver bullet switches, for example, they're an absolute bugger if you get them too hot. They will fail left, right and centre if you apply too much heat to them. So quite a lot of the stuff that we work with, you know, you've got to be quite quick, particularly with the switches. Just a little tip to bear in mind. Let's pop into our second ad break. I hope you're finding this useful thus far. Sort of, I hope. Back in a tick.
Liberty Flight sponsors 10-year tip with Garry Dibley. Liberty Flight sponsors 10-year tip with Garry Dibley.
And we're back in the room once again, and very truly pointed out in our chat once again, those particular switches I was talking about, that particular one I was working on, it is obviously made, it should be normally push crimps, but we tend to solder. Many modders solder switches in, and that's what we do. So if you pay sort of careful attention, you run very little risk of damaging. The silver bullet switches, for example, were never meant to be soldered. They start life as a screw terminal switch. But you know, to get a better joint in a mod, solder is the best thing to use. If you use it respectfully and you know, respect the heat on the switch, then there shouldn't be a problem. Let's rapidly move on in Mark's sort of final bit of his. I love this mod. I want that. It'd be great. Something you can open beer with and vape. In favour of this. So let's crack on. I'll see you back in 2.
Try and use the step drill bit, and I need to go up to about ½ an inch. I've got a horrible feeling this isn't going to work, but we shall see. And we are sort of there. I've certainly gone off to one side, but if I'm very lucky, or not, it needs to be one bigger, I think. So that will just fit in the end. So I'm going to clean up and I'll be back in a second. As you should be able to see from this, that's where everything's going to sit. This will just be glued in place, I think, probably with epoxy. But with these parts in here, there's no way it's going to go together and fit in place. So I need to knock these back. Just for quickness and easiness, I'm just going to use a grinding bit on the Dremel. So now with all that ground out the way here, so I've got a nice clear channel, this should keep the wires out of the way, fit back together like so, and then this bit will just sit in the end. All I need to do now is mix up some clear epoxy, I think, and just epoxy this into place and possibly a bit around the batteries to hold them in place. And we have a nice little bottle opener, e-cig. I'll be back when that's all done to test it all out, I think. So here we have a finished bottle opener mod. A nice ego fitting on the end. And where they look, it should. A couple of lights there. Maybe a light on the switch. One tip: I've epoxied this in place with a clear epoxy, so it makes it all nice and firm, holds everything in place. If you're going to be working with the clear epoxy, I'd advise keeping a damp cloth handy. It makes life so much easier to wipe things down while it's still wet. Keeps everything nice and neat, and it's also handy for keeping the stuff off your fingers. So, time to test it, I suppose. And I might as well have something which sort of matches. So a C type claramizer thingy. Let's have a go. Sizzling nicely. I think that should work rather well. completely utterly useless and pointless, but a fun novelty mod, I guess. Always handy for the guy that likes a drink. Yeah, I'll catch you all next week. Hopefully the postman will have been by then.
So as we were saying earlier, obviously too much heat, you know, you can damage what you're soldering on, and that goes for pretty much everything. Removing joints, pretty much the same principle. Clean your tip, tin your tip, little dab on, and that will remove. Same again with our wire. Clean, little dab, remove. You don't have to use masses and masses and masses of solder to achieve a good joint. Using masses of solder, you will sometimes bridge across things you don't need to bridge across, this, any other. Obviously when working on, you know, finer points, you know, the less you've got on your tip, or a finer tip, the better you'll be. There are some things that are a bugger to solder on. For example, the silver type of connectors that we do see quite a bit of. Now here I've got an ego connector that's been stripped out, etc, etc. Now these can be an absolute git to solder to, but what I tend to do with these is, if I'm going to be soldering to something like this, I will always find a point that I can sort of just take a file to. And you can see what I've done there is just taken back a little tiny edge, taken off the coating there and gone back to almost like the coppery like stuff that's underneath there. If I grip that in the vise, and I'll try and do it at an angle so you can see, there's me bit I've taken off. Now you can get a solder point on here, and I've found, you know, it can be relatively simple if I use my normal principle of tinning, applying the solder, sticking it on. But what I also tend to find is sometimes that is not the best of joint in terms of durability. That can quite easily sort of come off. There we go, I'll show you, just pick that off. Can you see that? It literally just picked off the top of that, and all I've left is the residue. So effectively all I've done on that is attach that by, and there's my joint. I've attached it by simply sort of bonding it to the surface. Now it will give you a fix, but not a very durable one, and not one that's going to last, you know, a decent amount of time. We're taking a little bit back on these silver type connections. You can get, and it's going to be difficult to work at this angle, tin my tip, bring it in, get me fix on that point there, and when that's cooled, that's a damn sight that is not going to pick off like the other stuff. As much as I try, that isn't going to fix, because that is properly bonded. And then I can get, after tinning my tip, bringing it in, getting my wire fixed, I've got a solid point on there. That is a solid fix. Soldering direct on these, as you see, all you're doing realistically is building up a level on there with the resin that's in the solder. Looks like you've got a joint. You can actually solder a wire to it. Just tin a bit up, bit of wire. You can even fix to it. and you'll probably get a decent sort of connection from it. But in terms of durability, it's not bonded, because all you've done is use the resin to, or you know, the flux or whatever to make a bond to the metal. Whereas this, by taking that bit back, has made that solid. Just one thing to sort of be aware of when you're soldering to the silver type connections. Make sure you've got a good solder point. Now it's not every solder connection, every silver connection, but most of the ones that I've worked with, I've found I've had to take a little bit of the coating off before I can get a decent enough fix that I would, you know, if you like, put a mod out and know that that's actually gonna stay there. So really, just to sort of summarise on that, most solders have actually got, if you like, an optimum melting point, and they've got, if you like, a maximum sort of boiling point. And as I say, with the one particular solder I use, its max point is 500 degrees C. Maximum sort of flow temperature is at 400 degrees C. Keeping your tip cleaned, tinning the work that you're on, and tinning the piece that you want to solder to, and then it should be just a final tap together, which is why I think it looks so easy when you're watching it, you know, on the TV. It is relatively simple. Don't put masses of solder on, just enough to make your joint. Always test your joints as well. Hope that has been a little bit useful. I hope so. You know, it is relatively simple. Have a play. It is definitely worth investing in a sort of a very temperature iron. They can greatly ease the work, especially if you're going to be doing quite a bit of it. And you know, some of the, if you like, just the irons that plug in have got no temperature, you know, control. You've got no control. You don't actually know what you're heating to. So if you want to make a good job, get one of those. You can get them for about 20 quid now. All good fun. Back to me in the studio, and like I say, I hope it's been worthwhile. And there we go, we are back in the room once again. I hope that was a little bit useful. Hope it answered a lot of the questions that I received through. We're quite happy to do stuff like that. If there is something you want to see, we'll quite happily spend the time and do it. Love that, Mark. That was an absolute cracking little bottle opener. I really do think that if we were to post that everywhere, Mark's bottle opening mod, get it posted on loads of forums, I guarantee before Christmas that would appear in Fastech somewhere. That should be a mission, actually. See if we can get a bottle opening mod on Fastech. Just post it everywhere, and people will sort of, I'm sure some little man in China will be sitting there and think that's the best idea in vaping in the whole wide world, and by Christmas we'll have bottle opener mods in Fastech. I'm convinced. What have we got coming up for the rest of the week? Tomorrow night, I believe we still have Team Talk. Marco is sort of winging his way back with us. He may well be back, I don't know, but I'm sure there may be a Team Talk tomorrow. Following on with DE Talk. On Wednesday, we have VT Talk. On Thursday, the Haze Hour. Now, after the Haze Hour, DJ Daz will be on RY4 Radio, not to be missed. And on Friday, we do have Tim. Let me play his little intro. And on Sunday, back again with Team Talk. Now, don't forget the mission. The mission is to try and get a bottle top open mod in Fast Tech before Christmas. If we post pictures everywhere, somebody's bound to pick up on one of those. I think it should be a really good mission. And if we do achieve that, I will be over the moon, just for the fact that I would be. With all that said, I'm going to wrap up very, very shortly. I'm going to leave you with a little video. I've got, as I said, an apologies for the echoes at the start of the show. Children in Need raffle, hoping to do round about the end of October. I've got loads of stuff come through already. I've got a little promo vid with showing all the prizes, and we did it at start. I'll show it at the end. If you're interested, the music is by a friend of mine. He's called Lee Griffith, and you can look him up on the tube, on iTunes thing. He's on there. Northern Sounds is the album that he's got out. And I will leave you that. It's very emotional once again, guys. We'll catch you next week. See you soon.
So why can't I say something to change this situation? Well, no great words of wisdom springing to my mind. What have I done to deserve this aggravation? No, I never said I'm perfect. If I did, it was a lie. Meet me halfway. Do I have to get a stick so you can beat me once again? Meet me halfway. 'Cause you're not fair. 'Cause I've tried so hard to get to know you, but you're not giving anything away. I've tried every trick in the book to try to break you down, but I stand defeated. I hold my hands up now, you beat me hands down, yeah. So why do you use me to vent all your frustrations? Yeah, why does everything that I say have to be a lie? And why are you so deeply into confrontations? 'Cause I'm not going nowhere, and you'll miss me when I die. Meet me halfway. Do I have to get a stick so you can beat me once again? Meet me halfway. 'Cause you're not fair. 'Cause I've tried so hard to get to know you, but you're not giving anything away. I've tried every trick in the book to try to break you down, but I stand defeated. I hold my hands up now, you beat me hands down. No, no.
Liberty Flight sponsors 10-Year Tip with Garry Dibley.